Please be seated. Welcome everyone. We have 4 valid questions in item agenda number 1. For members of the public, 30 minutes will be allowed for questions from members of the public. Each questioner in attendance will get the opportunity to ask a supplemental question and will have 1 minute to do so. The person responding has 5 minutes to reply, and the questions of 2 minutes to reply to the supplementary question. Any supplementary questions must arise directly out of the substantive question. Question number 1 is Mrs. Armstrong in attendance.
No, Chair.
So take it as read. Could I ask Councillor Graham to respond to the question, please?
Certainly, Chair. And thank you, Mrs. Armstrong, if you're watching from home, for this question, which covers an important issue for the Council and for our residents. The Council has a team of officers called the Community Protection Team, who carry out patrols across the borough and issue fixed penalty notices for environmental issues such as littering, dog fouling and fly tipping where appropriate. Fines range from £80 to £400, depending upon the offence. And over the past few years, we have issued over 300 fixed penalty notices for litter, dog fouling and fly tipping offences. Also, as part of the Council's commitment to tackling environmental issues such as littering and dog fouling, an additional 2 environmental enforcement CCT vehicles were introduced last year. The Council now has a total of 3 prominent CCTV vehicles which help to increase the coverage of our patrols across the borough, providing greater visibility and confidence to residents. In response to your feedback, we have been out to take a look at the areas you have mentioned, and I'm pleased to let you know that clean-ups are taking place across that park. The Community Protection Team have also arranged to carry out patrols in the area and will take action where appropriate. We are also working with the businesses on the industrial estate and will complement additional work where necessary to keep the area clean and tidy. Lastly, I think it's important to mention that while the Council will continue to take action against those individuals who do not dispose of their litter and waste in the correct way, litter is everyone's responsibility, and we can all do our bit to contribute to keeping North Tyneside tidy and litter-free. I would like to make a special mention, thank you, to all the clean-up and community groups who go out sometimes on a daily basis to help clean up our borough, working with us, all on a purely voluntary basis, and they are a great help. Thank you again for raising this important issue.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Move on to question number 2. Is there Miss Prospert in the house, in the chamber?
No, Chair.
Take the question as read. Councillor Graham, could you respond, please?
Thank you again, Ms Prospert, for your question. North Tyneside benefits from a wide variety of routes which support active travel, including the extensive wagonways network, and I am certainly determined to continue to improve and develop our already high-quality network further. Last year, we adopted our new North Tyneside plan, committing to further increase opportunities for safe walking and cycling. We also updated our transport strategy, which has a key aim to encourage a modal shift to more sustainable modes of transport. In addition, in 2018, we introduced a cycling strategy, which emphasises our support for everyday cycling and includes a London-style tube map of the strategic cycling routes we are connecting up across our borough. Since then, our work has continued. For example, we have installed direct and convenient cycle tracks along the A189 Salters Lane, delivering a section of our cycling tube map, which links to Killingworth, Long Benton, and the various business parks in the corridor. We have this week started work to put in protected cycle lanes on the A191 New York bypass and on Rake Lane. It will also include new safe pedestrian crossings at the roundabout to allow safe walking and crossing. Over the next 12 months, we will be pressing ahead with the regeneration of North Shields, including a new link which will make it much easier to walk between the town centre and the Fish Quay. We carried out public consultation on these plans last year and have taken people's feedback on board to finalise the shape of the schemes. In line with government guidance, we are preparing a draft local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, known as the LCF WIP. This is based on our cycling network of tube map routes and connecting routes, particularly in our town centres, and this plan will be consulted upon later this year. The new plan will provide with further supporting evidence to help us as we seek further funding to deliver more and better networks for cycling, walking and all forms of active travel. This will complement our aim, set out in the Our North Tyneside plan, to publish an action plan and seek national investment to make North Tyneside carbon net zero by our new and ambitious target of 2030. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Move on to the next question. Question number 3 is Ms Stenning in the chamber. Councillor Graham, would you like to answer the question, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Seems to be all night tonight.
Thank you for this question, Ms Stenning. Gritting the highway is very important in terms of road safety. In fact, the Highways Act 1980 imposes a duty on a highway authority, which is North Tyneside Council, to take reasonable steps to remove accumulations of snow or ice from priority highways. In accordance with this Act, we have designated some 240 miles of priority highway, which are strategic routes, to receive treatment under our winter maintenance policy. We have 12 gritting vehicles and a team of 28 drivers who are on call 24 hours a day from the 1st of October to the 30th of April, and they respond whenever road conditions require it. I can confirm that some of our cycleways that are adjacent to the priority network, like the Coast Road, are included and are gritted or treated as part of this service. Our plans and approach will always take into consideration the extension and any upgrade of the priority network, including the cycle network along the seafront and our town centres. In addition to road gritting, we have also positioned grit bins in areas of high footfall, such as town centres and shopping locations, and will treat these areas when required. Grit bins are also provided across the borough in community locations of high risk to assist communities to keep areas safe. Whilst we cannot treat every footpath and cycleway in the borough when the temperature drops to freezing, we do make every effort to ensure there is safe movement across the borough for all highway users, including buses, cars, cyclists, motorcyclists, and on all our strategic routes. In relation to the impact on the borough of Storm Arwen, we are still responding to the devastating impact the storm had on many homes, businesses and public places across the borough, including our wagonway and cycle network. Following the storm, we have redirected a lot of our resources to carry out clean-up operations. Unfortunately, due to the extent of the damage caused by the storm, the clean-up is ongoing in some of these locations and will be for a few weeks to come. I hope this information provides you with assurance of the Council's commitment to keep the borough's roads network safe during the winter and times of extreme storm. I hope you can bear with us as we complete the Storm Arwen clean-up. We are making good progress and we'll get there very soon. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Move on to question number 4. Is Mr Appleby in attendance? I take the question as read. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Mr Appleby, for this question. Over spring and summer 2020, despite the pandemic, the Council worked with key stakeholders to develop its Climate Emergency Action Plan, which was presented to Cabinet in the October of that year. At that time, the Council was working towards a 2050 target, and the action plan included a number of key objectives, including improving energy efficiency and decarbonising power, heat and travel. And I am pleased to report that we are delivering against those objectives. For example, we are converting all of our street lights to LED, installing low-carbon heating in our leisure centres and cross-tenure homes, installing renewable energy systems in homes, electrifying our vehicle fleet and supporting the uptake of electric vehicles for residents through our new electric vehicles charging strategy. Following Council agreeing our ambitious policy commitment to publish an action plan of the steps we will take and the national investment we will seek to make North Tyneside carbon net zero by 2030, we are working hard to refresh our plans, and we will present an updated action plan to Cabinet later this year. However, the hard work continues, and refreshing our action plan is not stopping us from delivering projects that reduce our carbon footprint. As we develop our new action plan, we will be identifying fully costed projects. We will continue to bid into grant funding from government where possible and present investment opportunities to the Council's Investment Programme Board, where grant funding is not made available, just as we did for our street lighting LED project. The Council's budget proposals for this year also include initial capital investment growth for climate emergency initiatives to support key strategic decarbonisation projects, such as the electrifications of the authority's vehicle fleet, and are based on current market costs. We are working at pace to deliver on our 2030 commitment. And whilst the government is working to a 2050 target, we are trying to mirror their plans, but at a quicker pace for the residents of North Tyneside. We want to take our residents and businesses with us and influence change where we do not have direct responsibility. And to that end, we will soon be setting up an outward-facing climate emergency board with businesses and other stakeholder organisations working together to make North Tyneside a greener, decarbonised borough fit for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. That's the end of the questions. I'd like to thank all members of the public for the questions. Move on to agenda number 2, apologies for absence. Do you have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of apologies from the Labour group tonight, and I would like to explain why first. That's all right with you.
Fine.
So, of course, there's a number of apologies from the Labour group. COVID rates are still very high in North Tyneside. In fact, they're the highest that we've had of any council meeting. In discussions with the head of governance, head of law and governance, prior to the meeting, we agreed that we told them that a number of our members would not be coming because of COVID safety. It is ridiculous in this state that we can't have electronic meetings still, but the government, of course, we know about that, so I'll go for the apologies from the Labour group now, Chair. Councillor Jim Allen, Gary Bell, Linda Bell, Trish Brady, Joanne Cassidy, Eddie Dark, Judy Cruddas, Linda Dark, Kath Davis, Peter Early, Muriel Green, Margaret Hall, Tracy Halway, John Harrison, John Hunter, Joe Kerwin, Erin Parker Leonard, Wendy Lott, Gary Madden, Janice Mole, Tommy Mulvenna, Paul Richardson, and that's it, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Are there any other apologies? No, thank you. Move on to item agenda number 3, declarations of any interests. Can I remind members that they have any registrable and non-registrable interests in matters appearing on the agenda, and in natures of interest, they must verbally declare in respect of any items of business to be discussed in the meeting in the nature of such interests. You have also been invited to disclose any dispensations for the requirements and declaration, any registrable or non-registrable interests that have been granted to you in respect of matters appearing on the agenda. Does anybody have any interests? Councillor Thirlwell.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to motion 1 on anti-Semitism, I'm a member of the Jewish Labour Movement and the local government Friends of Israel.
Thank you, Councillor Thirlwell. Anybody else? Now move on to item agenda number 4. Next item is the minutes of the council meeting held on the 25th of November 2021. Can I ask council to confirm those minutes? Thank you. Item agenda number 5. Next item is motions. There's 4 valid motions. Both have been received for the agenda. Please note the details of legal and financial implications of each motion were circulated to all members yesterday. Motion number 1 signed by Councillor George J. Westwater, Councillor Bones, Councillor Brockbank. Can I invite Councillor Westwater to move the motion, please?
Yeah, I move the motion.
Do I have a seconder?
Second and reserve the right.
Thank you. Can I now invite members to speak to the motion? Councillor Westwater.
Yeah, thank you. In 2016, the UK became one of the first countries to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. In September 2017, Council agreed to sign up to this definition and supporting guidelines. This definition is an invaluable tool of public bodies, including this Council and the wider public, to understand how anti-Semitism manifests itself into the 21st century. This definition is already used in guidance for the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, providing examples of the kinds of behaviour which, depending on the circumstances, could constitute anti-Semitism. There are quite a few councillors in the Chamber who have been elected since 2017, and I feel it is only right that we reaffirm and endorse the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism. To finish, Chair, there is no place in our society for hatred of any form of harassment, discrimination or racism, including anti-Semitism. Every member of the Council should ensure we stamp out anti-Semitism in all its ugly forms. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westwater. I'll now invite members to speak to the motion. Anybody like to speak to the motion? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. This is a motion that we will absolutely be supporting on this side. This passed our group of absolute unanimity when we discussed this the other night. It's a motion that we have actually brought originally to this council, and we absolutely fully stand behind. And any member of this group will be 110% be willing to affirm this from this side of the chamber, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Brockbank.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate what Councillor Johnson's just said, and I wouldn't expect anything less. I think, as Councillor Westwater's said, the issue is that we affirmed our commitment to the IHRA definition some years ago now, and there have been people who've been elected. We appreciate today is a rather odd setup in terms of members being present, but we would really ask every single member publicly to sign up to this definition, and there's some mechanism to work out how to do that. I don't know what that would look like, but I think given some of the concerns around anti-Semitism in the Labour movement nationally and elsewhere, it's really important that every single member signs their name to this pledge and understands the importance of this.
Thank you, Councillor Brockbank. Councillor Rankin.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make clear, just following up on what Councillor Johnson said there, it was the Labour Party who actually brought this motion to Council originally, and it was passed unanimously, and it would pass again unanimously tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rankin. Anybody else? Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chairman. I also support this motion wholeheartedly. Along with many other members of this council, I attended the anti-Semitism training that was provided, which was extremely helpful and very thought-provoking. The work which the members of the Jewish community had done was extremely valuable. Unfortunately, there have been a number of high-profile comments in social media by elected people, notably within the Labour Party, of anti-Semitic nature. And indeed, that training did highlight some of that. I'm sure everybody that attended that training found it extremely valuable, and I hope that everybody will be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Would anybody else like to speak? I think we just go straight to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Westwater will sum up if he wants to.
Would you like to sum up, Councillor Westwater?
No, I'm fine, thank you. I'm okay.
Should we just move straight to the vote?
Yes, indeed, Chair.
All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
It's unanimous. Thank you. Move on to the second motion. Could I invite councillor opponents to move the motion, please?
Thank you, Chair. Since the introduction of charges to the Tyne Tunnel in November last year, thousands of residents have described the new system as deeply unfair. There is now no way to pay on site. Instead, payment must be made by midnight the following day, online, via the app or at PayPoint. Failing this, for any reason, results in a £60 fine. I'm sure that members across the Chamber will agree that whatever the good intentions of Tyne Tunnel bosses, the system has been poorly implemented, an unfair fines structure and malfunctions at every turn. Our motion, which I hope will receive cross-party support this evening, reflects the views of over 10,000 people who signed the petition. This shouldn't be a party political issue. After all, the petition has been set up by a Labour activist and supported by the Labour MP for South Shields in the House of Commons. The motion asks Tyne Tunnel to cancel all unpaid toll charges in the past 6 months, up to January the 1st. This gives residents a grace period while the kinks in the system are ironed out, rather than having them chased by bailiffs for a £1.90 toll. The motion also asks that the period to pay be extended to 5 working days. This is in common with many of the ULEZ zones across the country, such as in Bath. This is a much fairer timescale and will, I believe, reduce the amount of fines issued to our residents. While some advertising has been done around the new system, the speed at which it was introduced has caused some concern, especially for people not from the area. The signage, albeit temporary, is insufficient and is not lit at night, rendering it essentially useless for 16 hours of the day in winter. In terms of ethical fines, there's been a lot of discussion about the price, and we've included in the motion the price suggested by the petitioners. I think that everyone will agree £30, which doubles if not paid, is an extreme amount to send one letter. The final point of this motion asks for more flexibility in the appeals system. I've had residents report being fined after missing the deadline by a matter of minutes, fined despite having credit in their account, fined because the auto top-up system didn't work, and even fined because they have a blue badge and as a result don't have to pay. Yesterday, myself and Councillor McIntyre visited the Tyne Tunnel to meet with bosses to discuss the motion. We remain unconvinced by the logic in the fines and the remaining kinks which are yet to be ironed out. This motion takes a balanced, cross-party approach to the new system at the Tyne Tunnel, asking bosses to think again. I've been overwhelmed with stories of unfair fines and confusion over the past week. I hope that we as a council will back our residents against this unfair and deeply flawed system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bones. Do I have a seconder for the motion?
I'll second it and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Can I now invite members to speak to the motion? Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The notice of motion addressed a number of concerns expressed to us by residents who use the tunnel on a regular basis and who've had difficulty in accessing the computer system, either to set up a new prepaid account or even to top up an existing one. One resident recently explained to me the time consumed when topping up an existing account. Instead of simply submitting the details as requested, the screen froze or not allowed completion of the process. Only by accident was it discovered by going back to the previous page, then going forward again, was the required information allowed to be submitted. apparently that had to be done repeatedly for each line of information requested. So what should have been a 2-3 minute job took probably 10-15 minutes, and it was only by chance apparently that this task was achieved and the account was topped up. However, the most serious issues seem to be occurring when motorists without an account try to pay the toll within the prescribed time, but the payment system fails to allow them to do so, which then leads to people being fined. But again, the payment system seems not to be able to cope, and motorists are being fined for non-payment when they've made a genuine attempt at paying the toll, Mr. Chairman. There have been too many examples of this to just brush it off as a try-on. It's clear that the tunnel's payments management system is struggling to cope with the demands on it, and until we can all be assured that tunnel payment system is working as it was designed, this council should call on the tunnel management to take remedial action to address the current shortcomings. But more importantly, recognise that there are serious issues to be addressed and adopt a more pragmatic approach in dealing with late payments and fines. So which is why we are calling for fines prior to the 1st of January to be cancelled, increase the time period to pay later, and to scrap the current penalty charge system and to carry out a review into the appeals process. I hope, Mr. Chairman, that full council can support local residents by supporting the notice of motion.
Thank you, Councillor McIntyre. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. There have absolutely been issues with the implementation of this new system at the Tyne Tunnel. The system has seen failures on the Tyne Tunnel's end, where they have not put systems into place where appropriate actions have led to some people being fined. In fact, at my committee, at the Joint Transport Committee, which I chair, the Joint Transport Committee Tyne and Wear Committee, which I chair last week, we found out over 600 people had been incorrectly fined at no fault of their own within the first month of being in place. We've ensured TDT will immediately and swiftly contact all of those people to make sure they are refunded. I think the principle of barrier-free tolling system is absolutely correct and is already having major benefits for our borough. We all know the plazas were in our borough, where there was lots of congestion, backed up traffic. In the first month of operation, the borough has reduced its carbon emission. That area has carbon emissions reduced by over 90%. The speed at which people get through the tunnel has increased significantly at now over a minute. There are absolutely issues with the operation as T2 have implemented, first of all. However, with this motion, there's a certain issue with this. It's not necessarily the principle of motion calling on TT to do more, it's some of the issues raised. So point one, cancel all unpaid toll charges in the last 6 months prior to the 1st January 2022. The system was introduced on the 8th of November. If we cancel all toll charges prior to that, we will leave ourselves open to legal action, because then anybody at any point that's ever got a fine in the Tyne Tunnel will have absolute justification for taking legal action against a Tyne Tunnel of all the period of time. No problem with calling Tyne Tunnel, but that's certainly something we couldn't pass. Increase the time period from which pay later from 48 hours to 5 working days. That's incorrect, first of all, because it's not actually 48 hours. You have until midnight the day after you go through the tunnel. The Joint Transport Committee have asked TT2 and Transport and Cease to review that period of time already, so we already did that and we voted on that earlier in the week. Engage in a concerted advertising campaign to ensure people are fully aware of how the Tyne Tunnel works and encouraging frequent travellers to sign up. Again, absolutely admit TT2's marketing was simply not good enough, despite the fact that I personally knew and lots of other people knew it wasn't good enough, it didn't reach the right people, and the signage is particularly poor. It is temporary signage. They have finished the construction works now. That's something we will look to move on at the moment. Point four, scrap the current penalty charge system. The penalty charge system was agreed in conjunction with the Conservative Secretary of State, because that is they have the ultimate say. With the bylaws having to be improved by the Conservative Secretary of State, they have the ultimate say of what is and what isn't okay. They agreed that the level of penalty was fair, because the level of penalty allows the Tyne Tunnel Company to recover the cost of charging people the fine. I do personally think it is too high, but that was agreed with the government at the time. So what I've agreed that with Tyne Tunnel and Transport and Office, the chair of the committee, is we should absolutely introduce a hardship fund. What this hardship fund will do is that anybody that goes through the tunnel and gets a penalty and can't afford to pay, after they've exhausted all avenues of appeal, they will then get that fine written off if they can show that will cause them financial hardship. Very ethical to do that, so for people that absolutely can't afford to pay. review the appeals process and produce clear guidance that is publicly available on what process TT2 are limited. That is all very much in the public case already. We have when we had Tyne Tunnel before our committee the other day, we ensured that they will absolutely review all cases carefully and sensitively, and they have agreed for first-time offenders they will continue to treat all cases sensitively, and I know a number of first-time offenders have had their toll quashed on appeal. Some of the things else that we've agreed with TT to do as well. I've already mentioned the Hardship Fund. We've already mentioned that we're going to ask them to review that, but some other things they've done as well. So anyone with a prepaid account who does not have enough money in their account when they go through the tunnel, they will get an email saying you have to pay within 24 hours as opposed to a fine as they currently would. Prepaid customers, we know that a problem for prepaid customers is the minimum is £10 to top up, and everyone has £10 all the time to put into their bank. So we've asked Tyne Tunnel to reduce that to £5. So the minimum amount where you can get a recurring top up if you go below is £5. Anyone that has a prepaid account and goes under £5, you will get an email to say your balance is under £5. Please top up to prevent it going forward in the future. We've already said about the 500 people incorrectly fined. We've already said about the leniency that TT2 will continue to show on first offence. Signage will be improved. All directions that you come into the tunnel in future, we'll say signage much further out. If anyone's been across the Dartford Tunnel, you see it from about 10-15 miles out. At Tyne Tunnel, that's not the case at the moment. We want to ensure that you can see that signage on all of your approaches to the tunnel. We want more staff to reduce call volume times. A lot of the frustration that I've had in my emails is that the people that are getting fines and are ringing up, it's just taking them so long to get on. They are busy people. We need to be ensure that their call waiting times absolutely come down. If for whatever reason you have forgot to pay your fine, you should be able to get through, and you should talk to Tyne Tunnel about the appeal process about the fine. It's not good enough at the moment. They are recruiting more staff to ensure that they've had. And also TT2 haven't exactly been front and centre defending the Tyne Tunnel process. There's been lots of media coverage on this and they haven't been out there. We will ensure that TT2 has said they will respond more publicly and openly with users of the tunnel about what they're doing. So while we absolutely support the principle of this process has not been implemented as good as it should be, there are absolutely issues. We can't support the motion for the reasons I set out in the terms of the 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 in the motion. So we'll be voting against the motion, but we very much agree the principle that Tyne Tunnels haven't implemented this greatly and things need to change. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Sorry, Councillor Rankin.
Thank you, Chair. This has been a major issue, and I welcome the fact that the party opposite are saying that it's not a political one, so I wouldn't expect to see you releasing tweets tonight and things like that about this. The major problem that I have with it is around point 1 and point 4. It is nonsensical to say to cancel all fines back 6 months when the system was only put in place in November. On point 4, though, the current penalty charges, which I think, again, Councillor Johnson has made clear was agreed with one of the Secretary of State responsible for this. But as I understand it, and I'm pretty certain that when you met with the directors yesterday, they would have explained this, it actually costs Tyne Tunnel, I think, either £20 or £25 for the tracer. It's the cost of the tracer for the number plate to actually get the details of the person who's driven through. So as it stands, that point there would mean that someone who hasn't paid, it would actually cost Tyne Tunnel money to actually track and trace them down and then issue the fine. So I can't support that, because obviously there has to be a principle of fine. There has to be a principle of fairness from the point of view of, a settlement means that it's much reduced, but it would actually be costing Tyne Tunnel money. So if you met with the directors yesterday to discuss this motion, that's something I think they would have explained to you. So again, on that basis, I can't support it. I think if you brought it back in a different way, though, then I absolutely would. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rankin. Would anybody else like to speak on the motion? We'll take it to the vote. Sorry, Councillor Bowens.
Thank you, Chair. And I thank Councillor Johnson and Councillor Rankin for their points, but I think it comes down to a fundamental issue of fairness and what the public feel are fair tolls and fair fines. And public opinion has clearly coalesced around the solutions listed in our motions. These aren't solutions that we've come up with. In fact, they're solutions that a Labour Party activist has come up with. And we are saying that we agree with the 10,000 people who have signed this petition to say that this is a fair solution to it. We did have a discussion with the directors of titling yesterday, and we outlined this case. Now, the information Councillor Rankin's just given us is completely different to the information they gave us yesterday, so that's a discussion for a different day. And what Councillor Johnson commented on how free flow works and how much of a positive effect it's having on our carbon emissions, and I agree, free flow is the best option. But I think it was a rush process, and removing the ability full stop to have any kind of payment on site, especially for people who are outside of the area, is a real issue. I think the solutions listed there are reasonable and should have warranted cross-party support. It's a shame that the party opposite can't support them, given that the members for South Shields has supported very similar. And I'll move straight for a vote, Chair. But can we request a name vote? Thank you.
Can we go to the name vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. So, this is votes in favour of the motion. So, Councillor Linda Arkley. Councillor Ken Barry. Councillor Lewis Bartoli. Councillor Liam Bones. Councillor Sean Brockbank. Councillor Brian Burdis. Councillor Carol Burdis. Councillor Joanne Cassidy. Councillor Karen Clark. Councillor Debbie Cox. Councillor Steve Cox. Councillor Naomi Craven. Councillor Sarah Day. Councillor David Drummond.
Against.
Councillor Sandra Graham. Councillor Tracy Hallway. Councillor Janet Hunter. Councillor Carl Johnson. Councillor Hannah Johnson.
Against.
Councillor Christopher Johnson. Councillor Frank Lott. Councillor Pam McIntyre. Councillor Anthony McMullen. Councillor Jim Montague. Councillor Andy Newman. Councillor John O'Shea. Councillor Norman Percy. Councillor Stephen Phillips. Councillor Bruce Pickard. Councillor Martin Rankin. Mayor Norma Redfern. Councillor Willie Samuel. Councillor Jane Shaw. Councillor John Sterling. Councillor Matthew Thurloway. Councillor Joan Walker. Councillor Judith Wallace. Councillor George Westwater. Councillor Matt Wilson. So that is 9 votes in favour of the motion and 28 votes against, Chair, so the motion falls.
Thank you. Move on to motion number 3, signed by
Chair,
Councillor...
sorry. It was just in relation to the early item of declining interest. I've just since realised I thought a membership had lapsed of the Jewish Labour Movement, but it hasn't, so it was just to declare an interest.
Okay, Councillor Johnson, thank you. Move on to motion number 3, signed by Councillor Willie Samuel, Sarah Deer and Carol Burdis. Can I invite Councillor Willie Samuel to move the motion, please?
Thank you, Chair. We are seeing a squeeze on living standards in the coming year, the like of what we have not seen in some time. We've seen the rise in national insurance, which is an aggressive tax, which is the lowest paid hardest, as being for the purpose of social care, but not actually funding social care in the foreseeable future. We've seen the cuts in universal credit happily championed with the other side. We have inflation at a level not seen in 30 years, which erodes the value of any pay settlements and will erode the modest savings of our people in low incomes. But most alarming of all is the staggering level of increases in fuel prices, and particularly the price of gas. The effect of the standard variable tariff means that energy companies cannot sell the gas they have purchased at a viable rate, and hence 20 of them have already gone bust. But the worst of it is that the standard variable tariff looks likely to rise by 50% or even more. Fuel bills will hit levels where thousands of households in this borough will not be able to pay and will have to choose whether to eat or to heat, and in many cases will find they're unable to do either. Increased fuel prices don't just hit our household users, they hit schools, shops, factories and offices. Costs go up and these costs get passed on to the consumer and again fuel the inflation that we were talking about earlier. So the motion asks government to take action now. As fuel prices increase, the government will collect more VAT than it would have done, so there lies the issue. The motion calls on government to look at the options to mitigate the rise in fuel prices. The Labour Party has suggested that we temporarily remove VAT from fuel bills until such times as prices stabilise, and that we use the process of a windfall tax on energy companies to assist those that are hardest hit. There may be other ideas, the proposals may need refinement, we'd like to hear them. We're in the position where everyone who is going to be hit hard by increased fuel prices, but for some of the most vulnerable it looks like it could take them over the edge. It's not good enough for government to say nothing can be done or to sit back and watch the cost of living get out of control. We need a plan and we need to deal with this, so we need it now, and Labour has put a plan forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Samuel. Councillor Sarah Day, would you like to second the motion?
Yes, and speak now if that's possible.
That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Already I've been contacted by residents who are worried about the growing cost of living crisis and in particular the rising cost of energy. People in Tynemouth and North Tyneside are already having to make difficult choices between heating and eating. In February, Ofgem will announce the new price cap for April 22 onwards. According to energy experts, bills could rise by 46% from £1,277 a year to £1,865 a year. Rising energy bills are partially due to a short-term increase in the global gas price, but the reality is that a decade of Conservative government has left us exposed to the market. Labour has recently set out its plan to both address the immediate crisis and make long-term changes to ensure energy prices are affordable and fair. This includes targeted extra support to the squeezed middle, pensioners and the lowest earners, receiving up to £600 off bills and preventing all of the increase in energy bills currently expected. Removing VAT on domestic energy bills for 12 months from April 22, and expanding and increasing the Warm Homes discount, which currently only benefits 2.2 million households. This is all fully costed and would be paid for with a one-off windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas producers who have profited from the price rises. The rise in energy bills needs also to be seen in context. We are seeing rising inflation, rising costs of food and petrol, and cuts made by a callous Tory government, including the cruel £20 cut to universal credit that happened just before Christmas. At the same time, the Treasury has recently written off £4.3 billion in fraudulent COVID payments, and the High Court has ruled that the Tory government's use of a VIP fast lane for suppliers of COVID PPE for their friends and family was unlawful. I therefore fully support this motion, which seeks to protect the people of North Tyneside, and I hope everybody in this chamber, including those opposite, will do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Day. Can I now invite members to speak to the motion? Councillor Brockbank.
Thank you, Chair. I would simply say that the movers of the motion seem to have crammed into their speeches a great deal more than is contained in the motion. I think it's somewhat bizarre to think that the government wouldn't look at all available means of addressing the cost of living. I certainly know that that's something that is actively on the agenda and is being pursued. I know the Labour movement has put forward a plan, which I'm sure the government will look at in detail and respond appropriately to. I would say on behalf of the Conservatives in the chamber, we will support this motion simply on the basis of that the government is already doing what you're asking, which is looking at all possible avenues to reduce the cost of living. That's what you're asking in the motion. All the political bump that's come after is for the birds. But ultimately, what we're saying very clearly is that the government will investigate and look at any and all options, takes the issue of energy prices extremely seriously. But it also got to be recognised we live in unprecedented times where this government has spent unparalleled amounts of money on public health, on keeping the country going, and Labour very clearly were very quiet during those times about how they would do things differently. So slightly rich now, but absolutely we will support this motion because the government is already doing what you're asking.
Thank you, Councillor Brockbank. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to speak tonight to support this motion because I believe that a VAT removal is something practical that this government can do right now, and it will be felt automatically in people's bills. It will also give security to people across our country and to help prevent fuel poverty, a public health scandal and a standard of living crisis. The most economically deprived households will benefit the most because their proportion of income spent on energy bills is the greatest. And I also agree with how this will be funded by Labour imposing a windfall tax on the North Sea oil and gas companies who have used these proceeds because of the steep rises. These companies have had record profits. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chairman. I note in particular that one of the things which this motion seeks is a reduction in VAT. And as a Conservative, I'm happy to support that. As a Conservative, I believe in low taxes. I'd like to point out, however, that the only reason that we are in a position to be able to discuss a reduction in VAT on fuel bills is because this country has left the European Union. Prior to that, we would not have been allowed to do so because of the rules dictated by Brussels. The majority of this people in this country voted for, in the referendum, to leave the European Union, the biggest number of people that have ever voted for anything. And despite desperate efforts by those on the left, we have now left the European Union. The government got Brexit done, and we are now benefiting from that. I remember a debate in this chamber prior to the referendum when all the Labour councillors present voted for efforts to stay in the European Union. One of the things which we discussed at the time was the tax imposed on sanitary products, the tampon tax as it became known. It was one of those things which, again, the British government was not able to remove because of the rules from Brussels. That tax, fortunately, has now gone, one of the benefits of Brexit. And as I say, it's good that we can now discuss a reduction in VAT, and hopefully I would like to see a removal in VAT on our fuel bills. But let's not forget, it's only because we are now a free, self-governing, independent country, having left the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Andy Newman.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick point. I'm not trying to reopen old debates around the European Union. I think it's not really helpful at this time. One of the things I think this is really important that we bring this motion is because it was reported in the press about 14 days ago that the Prime Minister had refused calls to reduce VAT on energy. So we in this chamber are asking him again to look at that and change his mind. That's very important. So whereas Councillor Brockbank said that, he's sure that the government will look at it, well, the government's already refused to look at it. That's why this motion is important, and I hope you will put party politics aside and vote in favour of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I fully support this motion. I think whilst I'm very proud in North Tyneside, we're providing a wide range of support for our vulnerable residents across a wide range of issues, including council tax, including through our Poverty Intervention Fund and a whole range of other initiatives. People are still struggling in the aftermath with the impact of COVID, which has exacerbated inequalities across the board. Cuts to the universal credit to the benefit. I would seriously question if this government are doing enough to support our vulnerable residents, and I'm really concerned about what people are going to face going forward with rising costs of living and increased fuel costs. And if the government really do care, maybe they might want to start by reinstating the £20 cut to universal credit or introducing a social security system that actually enables people to live a real meaningful life and meet the costs of living. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Rankin.
Thank you, Chair. I obviously support this motion. It was just to remind the party opposite, however, that one of the reasons that people are struggling is because the £20 has been taken away, which you did support, the universal credit, and also the fact that an average earner in North Tyneside will now pay an extra £250 a year in national insurance because of the changes that have been made there. And also, and just to remind Councillor Wallace, Boris Johnson originally promised cheaper fuel bills when we left the European Union. He also said in October that he didn't have a concern around inflation. So that's how accurate he was. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rankin. Councillor Sterling.
These things on, I've got it. Basically, first of all, I'd like to contradict Councillor Wallace. You said all of the Labour group voted to stay in the European Union. That is not factually correct. That did not happen. You could ask ex-Councillor Les Miller about that. But when we look at this, what we're looking at is our poorest people in, some of the wards that we come from. We have got the poorest people there, and they're struggling to live now. They're struggling to actually get things done now. And with all these costs coming in, because it's going to hit all over, fuel bills will go on your food and everything. It's not that they just need something done for them, because they're going to be on the breadline. Some of them are struggling to keep themselves warm now. And with all these extra costs, and that's who we're supposed to be looking after. The people in North Tyneside, the people who actually put us here to look after their interests. And basically, it seems that sometimes we're just going back and forwards and not. And if you look at the money, Councillor Brockbank said there'd been unprecedented money put in. Yes. But how much went to the friends of the track and trace and stuff like that? Billions of pounds to a system that didn't work. There's been billions of pounds wasted during this COVID epidemic, because what's been happening is that a lot of times it's went to friends of the Conservative, people who have put money in for their elections and stuff like that. It's all wrong, and that's what's wrong with this. Sorry, I was going to swear there. This government at this moment in time. They are not looking after the people who actually voted for them and put them there. And the sooner they start doing that, the better, because it's not working at the moment. Everything's going wrong at the moment. And I will definitely be supporting this motion, and I think we should be doing more.
Thank you, Councillor Sterling. Councillor Thirlway.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed the Prime Minister only seems to care about the energy crisis after the Downing Street Party scandal reared its head again. I think the question we should all ask ourselves, does the Prime Minister care about the cost of living, or is this just a part of Operation Save Big Dog?
Thank you, Councillor Thirlway. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Hartley.
I wasn't intending to, but I will, because on one hand we've got all the discussion that seems to have come from the motion and other things added on. Interesting to hear all of that. I think we have made it perfectly clear we would be supporting this, but I would like to say why we have, poor people, and I think we all recognise that people have low-paid jobs and they're on low incomes. They can still be paid, they can still be handed I'm just trying to think of the word, when they've not paid or been unable to use the system on the TT2, and here again they've got no finance, even less. And what are we doing about it? It seems to me, like as somebody said, one of the councillors, well, TT2 would lose money. Well, actually, the people who haven't got any are not getting any, and they're having more taken from them. So it may be something that you all want to think about.
Thank you, Councillor Hartley. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Bowens.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to support this motion, as Councillor Brockbank said, but in terms of things that we can actually do in this chamber, I hope that given the current cost of living crisis, as it says in the motion, the members opposite will be voting for a council tax freeze next month. Thank you, Chair.
Would anybody else like to speak? Can I invite the mover to the motion to exercise the right to reply?
Well, I'm pleased to hear the Conservative group are supporting Labour's plans and to implement a reduction in VAT. Whether or not it was possible before Brexit is irrelevant. Brexit has happened. Whether we liked it or not, we're now dealing with the world as it is, and there's a possibility there to reduce VAT, and I'm pleased you're supporting us in doing that. In terms of the council tax, I can't let that one pass without just pointing out this nonsense that's getting circulating around the borough at the moment, which claims that we have £91 million in reserves, which you do not have, and that's been explained to you at the sessions we've had repeatedly. You know the level of reserves. It also comes up with this bizarre kind of figure of £511, which isn't even 3% of the highest rate of council tax. So misleading the public over the council tax, you're going to try and do that, is completely irrelevant and unhelpful in that debate. However, we're off at a tangent that Councillor Bowen's introduced. I'm glad you're supporting the proposal, the Labour proposals, and I'm sure the government will be pleased to hear that you're going against what they've said, because they, so far, all I've heard, they've ruled out any increase in VAT so far. So perhaps we'll see where you stand with your government in the motion later on.
Thank you, Councillor Samuel. We'll move on to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. We want a motion number 4, signed by Councillor Carl Johnson, Councillor Graham and Councillor Davis. I'd like to invite Councillor Johnson to move the motion, please.
Thank you, Chair. Storm Orwin had a severe and devastating effect on parts of our borough. 98 mile/hour winds recorded at the record-breaking level for a low-lying area. Damage caused to 250,000 homes in the northeast of England, the largest power cut for over 15 years, and the worst storm in Nexus's 40 years of history. Unprecedented level damages to homes and businesses right around this borough. I am very proud, though, of the Council's response to Storm Orwin. We door-knocked over 1,000 homes to identify those without power and provide to help our residents where they needed it. We identified around 70 people with social care needs who were without power and made direct contact with them. Made safe over 100 potentially dangerous structures. Identified 400 trees that had fallen, quickly assessing their priority for making safe. Handled over 5,000 customer contacts from residents looking to report damage, report vulnerabilities, or to seek general advice from us. Identified over 800 issues relating to roofs and fencings within our council homes. Implemented temporary road closures to keep people safe from falling trees, masonry, other debris. Kept the borough updated via our website, social media and direct messaging to elected members. I really want to thank over 100 staff that came in over the weekend to work to help our borough navigate our way through the storm. Priority in the first instance was undoubtedly given to those causing a danger of life, and I'm really proud of the way we handled the storm and did that. Our recovery effort is ongoing and we are still continuing to recover. It is such a large volume of trees falling in places that we still have to do. We've still got about 65 trees to go to pick up, we've still got 33 outstanding repairs, and we've still got highways that we still need to repair. That's because of the unprecedented nature of the damage. Our staff have been working round the clock to make sure this is an absolute priority. We need financial support from this government to ensure that we can continue on this road. Not only do we need financial support, but our residents do. We all know most people know what the Bellwyn scheme is. The Bellwyn scheme wasn't activated for this storm, which allows councils to reclaim money from the government. That wasn't activated this time, the government decided not to. It's also not fit for purpose in terms of the process that the Bellwyn scheme takes. One of the big things that the government haven't done this time, but they ran to in previous times of storms and floods in the south and conservative areas, but they haven't done this time in the northeast of England, is recovery grants for residents and businesses. So the government has in the past provided lots of local authorities with community recovery grants to distribute among residents and businesses affected by weather events. There's been no sign of this forthcoming this time. That is why the Conservative response is completely inadequate. I therefore call that we write to the Prime Minister to highlight our fantastic response to the storm and the situation handled, to call on the way they handled it, and also commit them to provide funding immediately to recover the nearly £750,000 that North Tyneside Council has spent so far, but also for them to give us grants to distribute to residents and businesses of this borough to help them recover from the storm. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Graham, would you like to second the motion?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. I'm only grateful that if a storm had to hit us at all, it came during the night hours, which I'm sure saved serious harm to persons, which is the most important thing of all. And I'm so proud of our teams who door-knocked on the Friday and all over the weekend to protect our most vulnerable. Our teams worked tirelessly and throughout the night to keep people safe and protect life and protect property. As Councillor Johnson has said, over 5,000 phone call and emails over that weekend, 800 issues with roofs and fences, and over 450 trees down and the consequent damage from that. And I need to pay tribute to our officers, many who've worked in cold, wet, difficult and sometimes very dangerous situations. They are heroes to our residents and a credit to North Tyneside Council. And I wish to formally thank each and every one of them. I spoke to an elderly gentleman on Saturday who was trapped in his house and could not get access to his car, a lifeline for this man. The team working alongside, clearing trees, cleared his drive for him. He told me they did not need to do it, but they responded to an 87-year-old call for help on that Saturday whilst out clearing other debris. I've information from officers that, like other local authorities, actual costs are not yet fully known. It will easily be in excess of £750,000, and the teams are continuing to find non-reported incidental damage as our routine round of inspection continues. In terms of some detail, Grosvenor Drive, for instance, in just one street which had multiple issues, the highway's cost alone for reinstatement is £32,000, excluding, of course, the costs of the environment team taking out the trees and clearing up. It will take an estimated £100,000 plus to undertake storm-related repairs elsewhere in the borough, but each job needs to be fully costed on a case-by-case basis. Hence, we can only give an upwards indication of the true costs at present. The ability to recover any costs is limited, and we need a full review into the fitness of purpose of Belwyn, activated at the discretion of the Secretary of State, and we know what's happened there. And it has a high threshold of criteria. And what is a red weather warning? 98 miles per hour winds, if not high risk and utter devastation. I second this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Can I now invite members to speak to the motion? Councillor Bournes.
Thank you, Chair. We wish to move an amendment to this motion. Do you want to circulate and then
circulate?
speak?
Yes, please. Members would like to take a few minutes to read this. everybody had enough time to read this? Councillor Bones.
Thank you, Chair. Storm Arwen caused a huge amount of damage in North Tyneside. Even driving around the borough today, you can still see the after effects. Trees lying flat and pavements in desperate need of repair. The response from North Tyneside Council was unacceptable. Members were given little to no information over the weekend of Storm Arwen. There was no number for members to contact over that weekend when residents had raised concerns. Instead, there was an online form. Councillors from all parties stepped up to the plate to support their residents, moving tree debris, completing the online form on residents' behalf and conducting ward walkabouts throughout the weekend. Additionally, there is still a huge backlog of work to be carried out following Storm Arwen. Day-to-day work has been pushed back at the expense of long-suffering residents, and some of the damage reports submitted on that weekend are still to be actioned. We of course agree that North Tyneside Council staff did some incredible work in the aftermath of the storm. However, we believe the processes and management in place over that weekend could have better handled the situation. That is why we're calling for a cross-party inquiry into the way North Tyneside Council handled the response to Arwen, just like the one currently taking place in Northumberland. The very least our residents deserve is to be assured that if something like this happens again, we'll be better prepared and members will be given the tools they need to help their residents through. I hope all members will support the amendment in the interests of all of our residents.
You got a second to the motion? Councillor Brockbank?
Second and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Brockbank. I'll invite members to speak the amendment. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. We will not be supporting this amendment. We'll be absolutely happy to have, we'll fully stand behind our staff in an inquiry, but this just absolves the Conservative government of any responsibility for their efforts in the storm completely. The situation is nothing like Northumberland County Council, where people were without power for weeks on end. The Conservative administration in Northumberland, where people in rural areas didn't have power, nothing to heat their homes. Our staff ensured anyone in North Tyneside that couldn't heat their home were door knocked and offered a safe haven if they needed one, unlike in Northumberland. I will stand behind our staff in North Tyneside 110% for their response to this storm. We would absolutely be happy to have an inquiry, and separate to this motion, I will ensure we'll have an inquiry, but we're not voting for this to absolve the Conservative Party of any responsibility at all. They were slow, they didn't implement the right things, and they've still not put up cash, whereas when there was storms down south, the Conservative Party is the first people to put up cash to ensure the recovery. They've done nothing for North Tyneside and nothing for the North East, while thousands of people lay in homes freezing cold for weeks on end. We will stand behind our staff and our response. Our response was absolutely fantastic in North Tyneside. I completely disagree with the account that Councillor Bones has read. I know Councillor Bones is new on the council, and he might not know what to contact, who to contact, or where to get the contact details. I had no problem contacting anybody on the weekend of the storm to ensure things would happen. I'm not sure why Councillor Bones didn't. We'll be voting against this motion because it absolves the Conservative Party of any responsibility, but separate to this motion, we will ensure the inquiry does take into response, and I'm happy to stand behind our staff 110%, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Like the Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to say to all our staff, to be quite honest, we truly appreciate everything you've done during this time. And for this to come from Conservatives who last night were telling the people on the television, remember, to be honest and open and they want people to care and whatnot, I honestly think this is an insult to every member of this staff in this council who has worked so hard over the last 2 years to get us through these very, very difficult times. You should hang your head in shame. I have loads of actually emails and cards from residents actually saying to us, well done, you've done a fantastic job, you at North Tyneside Council. Do you realise, by some of the things you've said, how some of our staff must feel? Hang your head in shame, Conservatives once again.
Thank you, Elected Mayor.
Thank you. I just wonder whether the elected men and others have actually read this amendment. It essentially supports what you're asking for and actually adds to it. So instead of playing political games and using emotive language, this goes above and beyond what you're asking for. We fully support writing to the Prime Minister. You're only asking for one thing, write to the Prime Minister. Right, we're saying yes, absolutely no problem with that. What we're saying is let's go further. What we need to know is, as a council, as elected members responsible to our communities, what could have been different, what needs to be different, and how can we respond better? Just saying that everything is perfect and without fault is unacceptable. Councillor Johnson, I welcome, he said, separate to this motion, he will have an inquiry. Why then vote against this motion? It is a bizarre position to take, and all I can say is it seems to be playing politics with a very serious issue. We absolutely would say that this is about trying to work together, and that's why we call for a cross-party inquiry. So that the politics can be taken out of it, and there's genuine scrutiny of what's happened, and that could be reported back to representatives, and there could be real challenge and scrutiny over the way that we do things. As Councillor Bones has rightly said, again, there seems to be selective choice of what people are hearing this evening. We absolutely recognise the incredible work that's been undertaken. We're not denigrating that. What we're saying is, as people who are responsible for scrutinising the way that this council operates, what we're asking for is more than what Labour are asking for, to move away from the petty politics of saying the government's response was totally inadequate, and actually focusing on the meat and gravy of this issue, and actually making us a better council, a more resident-focused council. I don't think that's unreasonable. So hang your head in shame if you vote against this elected mayor.
Councillor Graham.
The government could have acted faster in its Storm Arwen response, a minister has admitted. After thousands of people were left without power for weeks on end. Energy Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng described the delay as completely unacceptable. Can you imagine if this had happened in the south of England, in the Shires? Ministers, the Prime Minister himself indeed, would have been crawling all over it. It took over a week for anybody to come. And Councillor Sanderson, in Northumberland particularly, was very upset. How you can stand there, Councillor Bones, and say that our staff didn't respond well. I think it's just your naivety. I will not be supporting this amendment and hope that you will accept our original motion. Thank you.
Excuse me, Chair.
Thank you. Can I just remind people not to butt in when people are speaking? That goes for everybody. Councillor Bones, there's other people, unless you've got a point of order.
Point of order, Chair. We didn't say what Councillor Graham... I didn't say what Councillor Graham's just accused me of saying. I said that the response overall was unacceptable. I didn't say that the staff didn't work hard. In fact, it says specifically that we agree the staff did some incredible work within the speech. So I'd ask Councillor Graham to withdraw that comment.
I'll withdraw it, but the intimation was that you were talking about our staff not coming up to the mark, and I take exception to that, because there were staff who did not go home for hours and hours on end and were very cold and very wet.
Thank you. We're going to move on. Councillor Rankin.
Chair, I won't be voting for this either. What was said from memory was that staff did an incredible amount of work, but that it was an inadequacy within the management response, which is still staff, essentially. All this is doing is effectively trying to move the responsibility for the response from the government and onto North Tyneside staff and management, and I think that is just absolutely disgraceful. So the other thing I would say, as with any other big organisation, when something like this happens, there is always a review of all the services and all of the responses. You could easily request it through overview and scrutiny if you wanted to. It would be something that is made public. But the idea of saying there are still trees lying down now, of course there will be, because everything was prioritised at the time from the point of view of where there was major trunk roads, major roads, pavements, etc., etc. There is still work to do because we have a certain number of staff, a certain amount of capacity, and what happened that weekend was a major incident across the whole of most of the United Kingdom. As I say, to try and move the responsibility onto the staff at North Tyneside from the government when you've got your own ministers saying that it wasn't good enough is just disgraceful.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Stone.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, I think. Basically, as soon as I read the first green letters on here, the amendment, I was then decided I was going to vote against it because it's an attack on our staff. And there's no way I can fault our staff in any shape or form. They're done brilliantly during this storm. But I was actually affected by the storm because at Terry's house in Whitley Bay, a rather large chimney pot came down and hung on our roof, and she couldn't sleep in her bedroom because she was scared it would come straight through. And they acted very quickly to take her out of danger that it was absolutely brilliant the way it was actually done. It was taken down the next day, and but to have a go with staff, don't forget, the reason we haven't got as many staff now as we used to have is because of Tory cuts that have been hitting us for years and years. And right, the council isn't as big as it was 10 years ago because of Tory cuts. We can't afford to employ as many people. And we do very, very well. We've done better than anybody else with the staff we've got. And the staff that actually looked after this done a brilliant job. And, and there was no help given from the government. I was watching the television the next day and they were showing you all the stuff that was done in the south. But there was nothing done down here. It shows where the priorities lie. And to be honest, this government wants a good shake-up, as I said before, and it should be given to them.
Thank you, Councillor Stone. Councillor Hartley.
Thank you. I will be supporting the motion which is being put forward by Councillor Bones. In this, the second question talks about the council staff and the incredible work that they've done. What we're talking about is what has happened. It wasn't the first time we'd had something dramatic. We'd had, the Thunder Thursday, which was incredible. How do I know? Because most of the councillors and staff, they were all out. I don't think many of them went to bed. And, just worked and worked and worked. We had, at the end of all of the work, we did have an inquiry. Everybody was involved in that, yes. There were people from the various parties. And here we are. Just, for me, I can't believe what I'm hearing. It's just an awful situation where you just want to throw bricks. And, why can't we be part of a party inquiry? Why not? You're trying to keep people out. Surely bring them in so everybody can hear what has been done, what's been, what can be set up to say this happens, so we'll be moving on, we'll be doing that, putting it in place. And it allows the Chief Exec, along with the Mayor, to be aware of how and what is going to be proposed and put in place. I would ask you to consider what is being proposed by us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try and keep party politics out of this and focus completely on the amendment. Now, the amendment has removed our belief that the Conservative government response was totally inadequate. So that's essentially what your motion's doing. I have an auntie, my cousin, her husband, their small children, and my very elderly grandmother who live in a small village in Northumberland. And after 10 days, I've just checked it there because it was on Facebook when they posted it, let me know they were okay. After 10 years, they had partial electricity and kind of hot water. Now that, to me, concerned about my elderly grandmother, is inadequate. No matter how you look at it, it's an inadequate response. The MOD should have been asked sooner than they were to supply troops to help. There was a delay in responding to the SO. There was a delay in the government asking the MOD to send the army to help.
Now, in the past, when there's been large-scale floods in the south of England, the military has never waited that long. In my belief, I can't remember the military waiting that long to be asked to come and assist. And that's why I think it's inadequate. And that's why I can't vote in favour of this motion, because I believe the action taken by the government was inadequate, and it's important that we highlight it. It's been said by Conservative MPs that they got things wrong, and that in itself implies that their response was inadequate. So I can't vote for this amendment, and I hope that everyone on this side will do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Samuel.
Very briefly, Chair, I mean, in a minute ago we were getting into who said what said issue. The beauty of the recording the proceedings is we'll be able to look back and say exactly what was said later on, so we'll look forward to that. I just want to put on record my thanks to the staff and managers for the hard work they put on that night. I know they were working extremely hard. Obviously, after the event, as in all organisations, to look at what happened and see what lessons can be learned. But to call in an inquiry about implications saying they did something wrong is just outrageous.
Thank you, Councillor Samuel. Anybody else like to speak? Councillor Westwater.
Yeah. The actual amendment doesn't say anything about the delegation of the staff that we have in this council. I was up all evening that night updating social media with contact numbers, what was happening, etc. I was out on Saturday morning speaking to the guys cutting down the trees along Seaton Drive. I was up at St Mary's Lighthouse seeing they were all okay. So nobody's trying to cause any doubt that the hard-working staff of this council were out helping. So were the councillors. And we're all giving examples how family were affected. My father lives in Long Horsley. He was affected as well with the storm. So it's not all one-sided. It's just to have a review to make sure if it ever happens again that we can learn by the mistakes that happened in the first time. And that's the only way we can become better council and better councillors. And for not to have any review is just being a bit selfish.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? Councillor Johnson.
Just to come back to Councillor Newman's point, please. I do know for a fact that the army was deployed actually as soon as it was requested. And remember, the army can't just suddenly jump in itself. So in defence of the government, it actually was deployed, and I'm quoting, as soon as it was requested. Thank you.
Right, I think we'll move on. I think we'll have plenty of debate. Could I ask the... No, I didn't want to speak, sorry. Mover of the amendment exercise the right to reply, please.
Thank you, Chair. In response to what the Mayor and Councillor Johnson said, I think if the Mayor had actually read the amendment, the support for staff is in there. And if anything that in our amendment had negated what was in the original motion, it would have been rejected, which it wasn't and it doesn't. The motion as it stands and what the party opposite are asking for is supported throughout. In response to Councillor Newman, I think we all agree that Northern Power Grid could and should have done more. And I expect that they will be having an internal inquiry, which I know is part of the Northumberland inquiry as well. And as Councillor Johnson said, the government did deploy the MOD when it was requested. I welcome Councillor Johnson's confirmation that there will be an inquiry, but the amendment does ask for a cross-party inquiry, so I'd like assurances that it would be a cross-party inquiry as opposed to an internal inquiry. And indeed, if the council's response was so good over that weekend, then the party opposite should have no problem in backing a cross-party inquiry into it. North Tyneside Council are responsible for these things. It's not the government, it is the council. And just like during Thunder Thursday, so I'm shocked that Councillor Rankin is accusing us of shifting blame, when in fact the original motion does exactly that. It shifts the blame from North Tyneside Council, who can have an actual demonstrable impact on the ground, to the government, when the response is to be handled by the council. I think too often in this chamber, the party opposite forget what we are and aren't responsible for. We are responsible for our response to storms, and we aren't responsible for who is in number 10 or the government. We can make a difference in this chamber by the decisions we make, and the inquiry that we're requesting within this amendment would help make sure that any response to any future storm is better handled, and we should always be striving to do better for our residents. I hope all members will support this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bones. I think going forward it might be something for a scrutiny committee to look at, which is it's already been mentioned. Can we go to the vote?
Chair, can we have a name vote on the amendment, please?
So this is votes in favour of the amendment as proposed. So, Councillor Linda Arkley. Councillor Ken Barry. Councillor Lewis Bartoli. Councillor Liam Bones. Councillor Sean Brockbank. Councillor Brian Burdis. Councillor Carol Burdis. Councillor Karen Clark. Councillor Debbie Cox. Councillor Stephen Cox. Councillor Naomi Craven. Councillor Sarah Day. Councillor Davy Drummond.
Against.
Councillor Sandra Graham. Councillor Janet Hunter. Councillor Carl Johnson. Councillor Hannah Johnson. Councillor Christopher Johnson. Councillor Frank Lott. Councillor Pamela McIntyre. Councillor Anthony McMullen. Councillor Jim Montague. Councillor Andy Newman. Councillor John O'Shea. Councillor Norman Percy. Thank you. Councillor Stephen Phillips. Councillor Bruce Pickard. Councillor Martin Rankin. Mayor Norma Redfern. Councillor Willie Samuel. Councillor Jane Shaw. Councillor John Sterling. Councillor Matthew Thurloway. Councillor Joan Walker. Councillor Judith Wallace. Councillor George Westwater. Councillor Matt Wilson.
Against.
So again, that is 9 in favour and 28 against. So the amendment to the motion falls, and we now move forward with the original motion.
Can I now invite members to speak the original motion? Councillor Johnson.
Hi, Chair. I'd like to move an amendment, please. When we voted against that amendment just there, we identified that we are very fine to acknowledge that there is still a backlog. Myself and Councillor Graham acknowledged the backlog, which was the Conservative Party's first point that they added. We also said we're willing to have an inquiry. What we voted against it for is absolving the Conservative government of any response. So our amendment will be adding the Conservatives 2 points they added in green, but very much keeping in the Conservative government response was totally inadequate. I'd like to move that amendment and be it, Chair.
Who seconded that, sorry?
Councillor Rankin.
Councillor Rankin.
Chair, point of order, could we ask for a short adjournment, since this has just been sprung on us, to discuss as a group?
It's already written down, Councillor Brockbank. It's already in here. Councillor Johnson's already said it's roughly what you put in here in green.
No, it's a new amendment, Chair.
Well, that's your choice.
What's your choice?
Constitutionally, it's not something that's contained in the. It's down to your decision, Chair.
I'll give you a minute to read it. It's already down. That's exactly as soon as we had to read this amendment. Everybody else did.
Well, and with the best one in the world, that's a fair thing to do, to give them a moment to consider it between them. But politically, it's an incredibly astute move from Carl. Well.
Can I bring everybody back to order, please? Could everybody come back to order and be seated, please, so we can carry on?
So, members, for clarity, the amendment that has now been proposed is the inclusion of the two paragraphs that are you've circulated in green, but not the deletion of the paragraph in red. So that's the amendments that's now under consideration.
Can we just check that then there is a vote on the substantive motion following the amendment? Yes.
Does anybody want to debate? I mean, we've discussed this enough. Or do you just want to go straight to vote? Straight to vote?
So,
this is on the second amendment. All in favour of the second amendment?
Okay, so that's unanimous, Chair. Albeit Councillor McIntyre has left the room.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that.
So now we move to the
Now we'll move to the substantive
as amended.
As amended.
Which is the same.
Yeah.
The motion we now have.
Right, could I open the floor back up to people who want to speak on the substantive motion as amended? Councillor Rangan.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make something clear. In relation to the funding aspect of what we're looking for, as part of the budget process now, all councillors have seen the draft budget papers and also had presentations from the finance officers over the last couple of months. And just what I want to make clear is that the medium-term financial plan, as it stands at the moment, and everyone has seen it, shows that our unring-fenced reserves, which are the only reserves that we can use to balance our budgets and to look to do things with council tax, will actually go under the minimum £10 million that we actually set as part of our policy every single year. It will go under that over the next 4 years. And I just want to make that clear because I think Councillor Samuel picked up something before around things that have been put through doors across the borough. And I think this is one of them here, which basically says that we have £91.8 million held in reserves. And that is specifically in relation to that council tax number there. And that is deeply misleading from the point of view of our finances and what we're looking to do this year. So I just want to make it clear, we're looking for additional funding to get cash back into the council for the additional spend, because at the moment our reserves will go under the minimum balance that we set every single year as part of our Treasury policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rangan. Councillor Wallace.
Chairman, what on earth has all that got to do with this substantive motion that is now in front of us? I suggest we go straight to the vote.
Would members like to go straight to vote?
Right to reply, Chair. Right to reply, please.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted this motion has been accepted. I'm delighted that the Conservative Party accept that their government response was totally inadequate, so I'd like to move straight to the vote, Chair.
Go straight to the vote. All those in favour?
That's 28, Chair.
All those against? Abstentions?
That's 8, Chair.
Okay. Thank you.
So the substantive motion as amended is now...
It's now carried. Yes. Right, we're going to motion number 5, which is an urgent motion brought by Councillor Johnson, Councillor Day and Councillor Rankin. Can I ask Councillor Johnson to move the motion, please?
Thank you, Chair. The Prime Minister has treated the British public with the utmost contempt. He began by saying there were no parties, which swiftly changed to he wasn't aware of any After Downing Street staff laughed and joked about their response to them in the leaked video, the Prime Minister said he was sickened and furious. Then it turned out he himself was actually at a party in Downing Street, having misled the House of Commons on numerous occasions and been forced to apologise to Buckingham Palace. He then finally admitted he was there, but he didn't know it was against the rules. Rules which he repeated over and over on national television, urging the British public to step up and follow the rules, which they did time and time again. Downing Street, it appears, to offer to relax the rules for His Royal Highness's Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, but Buckingham Palace rightly refused. Our monarch sat alone to mourn the death of her husband of 70+ years. It then emerged the night before that Downing Street staffers had a DJ and a buffet and danced into the evening the day before the chilling image of our Queen sat alone. A situation repeated across the country over the many months of Downing Street parties and so-called Wine Fridays. Now it emerges when Tory MPs got sick of Boris Johnson's inability to lead the country and decided to put a letter to the 1922 committee or raise issues with government whips. They were threatened with public funds being withdrawn from their constituency, something which Conservative MP William Ragg said amounted to blackmail. New Labour Party MP Christian Wakeford, who quit the Conservatives because he has concluded that the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party have shown themselves incapable of offering the leadership and government this country deserves, revealed he was threatened that he would not get a school in Radcliffe if he did not vote in a particular way with government whips. This is a town that's not had a high school for the best part of 10 years. How would you feel holding back regeneration of a town for a vote? It certainly wouldn't sit comfortably with me. We all followed the rules to protect each other. Not being able to be with our loved ones as they passed away. Not being able to be with family and friends to mourn them. The Prime Minister has let the British public down, setting rules he had no intention of following himself, allowing a culture of partying and boozing while we were in lockdown. For once in his life, the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign. The Conservatives in North Tyneside should stand up to the government, not with wishy-washy calls for him to consider his position, but every Tory councillor should back this motion and call for the Prime Minister to resign immediately if they have an ounce of decency. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Rankin, would you like to second this motion?
I read your letter and I heard your interview, Councillor Brockbank, but you didn't actually call him to resign. You said consider his position, which is meaningless. He's already considered his position. News reports today say that he's issued some sort of bring it on to MPs wishing to see him go, as well as his Operation Save Big Dog and Red Meat. We are literally now down the Boris Johnson rabbit hole. We have a Prime Minister who knows what he's done and is trying to convince people that he's stupid rather than self-entitled in a desperate attempt to hold on to power, that he somehow needed a spad or maybe even his nanny to tell him that a boozy garden party was illegal at a time that he was telling people that boozy garden parties were illegal. This man has the nuclear codes, but doesn't seem able to remember to follow rules that he set for the whole country, reinforced by one of his ministers just an hour before they cracked open the bottles of bubbly. And we now have MPs going public about attempts to blackmail them to withdraw funding for projects such as schools if they don't get back into line and support them. I'm sorry, but enough is enough. In 2008, a young civil servant put a disc in an envelope and sent it to another government department by Royal Mail rather than secure post, and on it was millions of people's benefits details. And the Tories at the time called for Gordon Brown to resign because of it. You need to say those words, and you need to say them clearly, and the residents expect it. You need to support this motion without amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rankin. Can I now invite members to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be supporting this motion, and I'm wondering if this is the straw that's finally broken the camel's back of the opposition, because glancing at Boris Johnson's record, as I did today in my book of political scrap cuttings, this man has previous. He has apologised humbly and sincerely to Ethics Chief Lord Geit after begging a Tory donor to fix up his tip of an official flat with 112,000, then claiming he'd forgotten about it because it was on his old phone. This comes after the Tories were fined nearly £18,000. This is the Conservative Party were fined nearly £18,000 by the Electoral Commission for breaching election law over failures in how the money was declared. Thanks to the dilatory and delaying approach with which Boris Johnson worked on the initial outbreak of COVID, if you remember, he didn't attend the first 5 COBRA meetings. Tragically, the UK has now recorded over 175,000 people dead from this virus. And largely due to errors in that initial short-term response, errors such as offloading 25,000 untested elderly patients into the care home system, the PPE shortage, and keeping the airports open for weeks when people travelling through and into our country from countries experiencing their own epidemic. Incidentally, whilst Serco, one of the private firms running the triple test and trace system, has handed out £17 million in dividends to its shareholders from their £353 million contract handed to them. Also, Boris Johnson tellingly and perhaps presciently declined to sack Priti Patel for breaking the ministerial code when she was accused of bullying. Perhaps he foresaw his own fate. We heard earlier about Brexit and the success of Brexit, and I must correct one of the speakers from the other side who said that the majority of people voted for breakfast. They didn't. Sorry, for Brexit. The majority of people who voted narrowly to pursue Brexit. But as a consequence of that, we now have fishing communities that are facing ruin from a shellfish ban and a collapse in fish exports. UK businesses are finding it more and more difficult to export due to voluminous amounts of red tape. And after all the work by politicians of all the parties, we now have Northern Ireland being struck by violence again. Last January, a shortage of flower pickers meant daffodils were left to rot in the fields. And then I came across an article entitled Boris Johnson's 40 Lies. Now, I have to say that this was in December 2019, so it'll be considerably more than that now. But I've brought a sample along to the Council tonight. His claim that the Tories are building 40 new hospitals. Actually, there'll only be 6, unless they win the next 2 elections. Boris Johnson denied saying police were, and I quote, spaffing money up the wall on child sex probes. But in March last year, he said, £60 million I saw was being spaffed up the wall on some investigation into historic child abuse, and the language is his, in quotes, not mine. He claimed that the NHS cash rise was the biggest in modern memory. Tories were pledging £43 billion in cash terms by 23-24, a 3.2% real terms rise. However, the Institute for Fiscal Studies made it clear that this was still less than it used to rise under Labour. Another porky involved Melton Mowbray pork pie.
Sorry, Councillor, 30 seconds.
Sorry, could I wind up, Chair? I'll skip the Melton Mowbray pork pies, but it's a good one. I'll tell you later. The final number 40 quote was, "Johnson says he has never told a lie." Now, just 2 meetings ago, the members opposite were lauding Boris Johnson's achievement to us in the council. Now, I was tempted then to advise caution, anticipating that the Prime Minister they loved would be the MP that they would be voting out of office soon in order for him to spend more time with his families.
Thank you, Councillor Lord. Councillor Thirlway.
Thank you, Chair. I really don't know how best to express the anger I feel about this scandal. I keep thinking about my grandma. She's 85 years old and in poor health. During lockdown, the only time we saw her was when we dropped off food and medication. Before the start of the pandemic, she was mobile and could leave the house with help. Now she is bedbound and has only left the house to visit hospital for medical tests. Her health and, most importantly, her quality of life have declined rapidly during the pandemic. Precious time with her family has been lost. My family followed the rules. We followed the rules not because we wanted to, but because it was the right thing to do. We followed the rules to protect ourselves and to protect others. Because that is what British people do in times of crisis. They pull together and they work for each other, despite the personal sacrifices they have to make. Conservatives would call it social responsibility. Labour would call it solidarity. It is one of the single most important principles that underpins our civilised society. The stories coming out of Downing Street on a daily basis are sickening. The absolute hypocrisy of those at the top breaking the laws they themselves have made, telling us to stay at home to protect the NHS while stuffing suitcases full of booze, clapping for key workers while partying late into the night. In a post-truth world, the US has Donald Trump and the UK has Boris Johnson, two charlatans who will lie and scheme to survive. It's time we confine our fraudster to the dustbin of history. I'll end by quoting Dame Diane Johnson, who yesterday said, "When a Prime Minister is spending his time trying to convince the great British public that he is stupid rather than dishonest, isn't it time that he should go?"
Thank you, Councillor Thirlway. Councillor Debbie Cox.
Thank you, Chair. I work for the NHS. Myself, friends, and colleagues at work give their all to the patients and families under our care. People died feeling alone and scared. Their family could not be with them. Friends I know and work with are still feeling and living with the effects from the trauma of the time. And I'm not the only one. We all know someone. We have all suffered. We followed the rules. What did Boris do? He partied. Boris said, "No one told me it was a party. I thought it was work." A child would know the difference, and Boris is supposed to be in charge of the country. Sorry, someone that stupid and shown such contempt should not be in charge. If anyone at work did that, they would quite rightly be sacked. He needs to accept responsibility for his actions. He must go.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Bartoli.
Thank you, Chair. It's clear from anyone who's watched the news over the last few weeks that we understand the motivation behind this motion in front of us tonight, and we on this side of the chamber share many of the frustrations of our residents and our colleagues. When our leaders act in a way which we think is immoral, it makes us feel angry and it makes us feel frustrated. And as elected members, we viscerally feel the need to speak out and to give a voice to our residents and give a voice to those that do not have one. However, I would just remind the party opposite that for 5 years they were led by, campaigned for and supported an anti-Semite. While Jewish MPs resigned, Jewish members felt unsafe in their party. Where was the letter to their leader? This chamber sat silent. This is not my words, these are the scathing report of the ECHR, who found unlawful acts of discrimination and harassment in relation to anti-Semitism. Whilst I commend them today for demanding the highest standards of morals and ethics from the Conservative government and from this group, it is a standard for which they have fallen woefully short. Our leader fell short of the ethics that we expected. We acted immediately and we as a group acted decisively. In contrast, for 5 years, their Labour leadership displayed appalling standards of ethics and morality, and for 5 years they were complicit. I just hope in future they hold their own leadership and party to the same standards as they are now holding us and ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartoli. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I can understand why this motion is so emotive. It's probably one of the most serious motions we've ever had here. Because let's face it, essentially we're saying we have no confidence in the leader of this country. Now, I'm not going to talk about the number 10 flat, I'm not going to talk about the cost of living, track and trace, contracts, PPA, it's irrelevant. There's two things that I want to talk about, and that's qualities and trust. So of all the qualities we would expect of a leader, two of the most important, in my opinion, is empathy and moral courage. Now, regardless of your view of number 10, I think there's been a severe lack of moral courage and empathy shown by our Prime Minister. Now, I know we've already mentioned Her Majesty the Queen, and it was probably one of the most somber moments of the pandemic, watching the Queen sit by herself at the funeral of her husband. It was very important because it symbolised to so many people in this country what we'd been going through. You know, we symbolised the loss, the restrictions, and we all know that number 10 offered to, you know, relax the restrictions for the funeral, and the Queen said no, she wanted to be an example. And it's not just about the Queen, it's about every other person out there. My own father-in-law passed away, and we had to have his funeral at a time when there was restrictions. My wife's great uncle passed away, a man who served with the Royal Marines in World War II, a man who deserved a hero send-off, and unfortunately due to COVID restrictions there was nobody at his funeral. That's why the Prime Minister's actions are so damaging. We had a narrative in this country, a narrative that's been used so many times in national crises, of pulling together, you know, we're all in this together. And yet, under his premiership, while the people locked down and kept their distance from elderly relatives, he organised, so somebody at number 10 organised wine and cheese events to the scale that it's been reported that they had to buy another wine cooler. His actions have shown a complete lack of empathy and, more important in my opinion, moral courage and integrity. I also want to talk about trust, because I know we're political in this chamber. We'll always make political points, and we do have political motions. That's the nature of politics. But there's an unwritten rule in democratic nations that regardless of who you vote for, the person who's in charge of your country, you have trust that what they're saying is true. You may not agree with it, but in some way they believe it's right, and you trust that they're trying to do their best. And Boris Johnson has destroyed that trust. He's destroyed trust in number 10 and the office of Prime Minister, to the point that in the future, if there's another lockdown, if there's another variant, and we have to order another lockdown, people just won't believe him. That's why it's so dangerous, and that's why we've lost confidence in Boris Johnson. And if I could speak to Boris Johnson, I would say, you know, the words that have been uttered by so many people over the years, words that have very famously just been uttered by the MP David Davies. You have sat too long here for any good you have been doing. In the name of God, go.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I would just like to say that I think the behaviour of the opposition bench, who have been sitting there on their phones and discussing their political response while we hear the harrowing story of a former serviceman, is abhorrent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Day. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Yeah, at the heart of this motion is this question of leadership. After making those comments in the House of Commons, it was the ex-Brexit Minister David Davis was pursued by a BBC journalist who was very keen to find out why he'd stuck his neck out in that way. And his remarks were that he expects the leader of the nation to shoulder responsibility and that all the evidence is that he'd done precisely the opposite. One of the interesting things about the way that we've observed the pandemic being, managed across the United Kingdom is we have devolved administrations. And I think it's worth looking at the example of Labour's First Minister and leader in Wales, Mark Drakeford. And just a wonderful example of integrity that he's shown us. Even the reports that came out that he was sleeping in a hut at the bottom of the garden for months on end to protect his family who had health conditions and were shielding. I just think that's the kind of leadership. I'm so grateful that somebody from the Labour Party has shown that kind of leadership when it's so absent from our Prime Minister.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Westwater.
Thank you. I think it's important to point out that COVID did not have any political boundaries. Fair enough, you have families, etc., that's all suffered through COVID. So have I. I lost an aunt in Scotland. I had COVID myself. I went to the Wallsend Walk-in Centre opposite the Town Hall. 2 days later, COVID positive, self-isolation for 10 days. So it knows no boundaries, so don't tarnish us all with the same brush. If a Councillor Cox mentioned the NHS, do you know, people on this side may work in the NHS as well, Councillor Cox. So don't sit and lecture me about people working in the NHS, how it was awful. People knew what it was like, Councillor Cox. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westwater. Councillor Brockbank.
Thank you very much, Chair. Obviously, the entire Chamber will be aware of the course of action taken by this group, decisive course of action. Councillor Day, and I want to address briefly some of the motivation for that and some thoughts for that. Firstly, Councillor Day talks about abhorrent behaviour. Well, I'm sorry to say she could do worse than look at our own party's history in the past 10 years for an object lesson and the abhorrence of how to deal with matters in good behaviour. We've made our position abundantly clear in my letter to the Prime Minister, which has been published. We've had Labour councillors refer to us as rats and other such things, which will be dealt with through the Code of Conduct process. We would have thought the Labour councillors would have had the moral integrity to recognise how difficult this was as a Conservative group to write that letter, but clearly morality seems to be not in great abundance. This is a nakedly political motion which fails to recognise the seriousness of the cause of the action that we as a group have taken. As group leader, I made it clear that we do not purport to speak for every resident in North Tyneside. We don't pretend to speak for every Conservative in North Tyneside. Nor do I suggest that I speak for the party organisation. I speak for this group of councillors sitting here today. We've had a range of views expressed, which were from very, very supportive for people who are Boris supporters and who are very angry. So we'll take no lessons from Labour about what we ought to do. This was a tough decision and we've shown the backbone to see it through. However, we are clear that the reason for the letter to be sent was not an issue of policy. We absolutely commend the Prime Minister for his fantastic leadership up to the point of taking us out of the European Union, leading on Brexit, for getting Brexit done, for the COVID vaccine rollout, and for his, quite frankly, generationally significant levelling up agenda. No other government has ever proposed or been able to even think about how to do this and make it happen. This is an issue of integrity. The Prime Minister has delivered much more than any other Labour leader, I would suggest, in the past 20 years. But I want to address the issue of leadership that led us to writing that letter. It seems incredible to us on this side that the Labour Party seems to be historically either myopic or forgetful. If we are to consider political leadership, as Councillor Lott has partially touched on in his dander through history, we also have a history of, in 2002, Tony Blair being criticised for flat refurbishments, potentially the issues of legality of the Iraq War. We also have Jeremy Corbyn, who supported terrorist organisations and the culture of anti-Semitism, and Keir Starmer's failure as the leader of the CPS. These are not things to crow about, and these are not things to be proud about. That's leadership in the Labour Party has a very poor backdrop. We all called on you during the anti-Semitism issue to write to Jeremy Corbyn, to make your views clear, and not one of you, as far as we're aware, have done that. You were silent and complicit, as Councillor Bartoli has said. My group has been clear. We've taken a tough decision for the right reasons. It's called leadership, something you want to try. We're not going to support this politically motivated motion, and we'll abstain, as we've already done and gone beyond what you were already asking for.
Thank you, Councillor Brockbank. Does anybody else like to speak to the motion? Can I now ask the mover to exercise the right to reply, please?
Thank you, Chair. I am astounded with what has just come from the opposition benches there. We are talking about the most serious things that have happened in the last couple of years, and like always, the Conservatives talk about the past. What has happened in the last 2 years is that Downing Street staff have been boozing and partying while we watched our loved ones die through iPads. We sat alone at their funerals. That is what's been happening in the last 2 years. The very chilling images from this pandemic that will live long in the memory will be Her Majesty the Queen sat alone as she mourned her husband of 70 plus years. What will be attached to that forever is the Downing Street staff that had a DJ and partied late into the night that very same day. What also will live in the long in the memory is Allegra Stratton from Downing Street Communications Unit laughing in the face of the British public about how to defend parties. Those are the chilling images that will last forever, not anything. I want to talk about anti-Semitism for a second because it was raised. No one on that side knows what people on this side did in turn the Labour Party at all. And they are absolutely right. The Labour Party let the Jewish community down. And the HRC declared the party was institutionally anti-Semitic. The party accepted these recommendations in full and has made it an absolute priority to put them into place. The Labour Party has changed. And I'm delighted that a recent poll concluded that overwhelming majority of Jewish Labour Movement members think the Labour Party is a safe place for Jewish people. Just yesterday, a man from the biggest Jewish community in the north of England walked across the floor and joined the Labour Party. The man, Christian Wakeford, that chairs the all-party parliamentary group on British Jews. The Labour Party has changed. We are different than we were then, absolutely. What we've seen here is continued wishy-washy behaviour. We're going to abstain. You haven't called for the Prime Minister to resign, Sean. What you have done is called for him to consider his position. As my colleague, Councillor Martin Rankin, said, he has considered his position and he's very much going to fight it. That's why the whips are trying to currently blackmail people into withdrawing letters from the 1922 committee. If you had any ounce of decency right now, and Councillor Bones is trying to tell Councillor Brockbank, he hasn't. I've watched all the media appearances, I've watched his interviews. He's never said the word resign. He's too busy defending his so-called successors of Boris Johnson's premiership, which will be frankly labelled a joke in 10 years' time when the history book recommends it. If those 9 members opposite had a single ounce of decency, they would back this motion, calling the Prime Minister to resign immediately. But they're not going to, Chair, because they haven't got a single ounce of decency, while our public at home will rightly hold those 9 people to account in the ballot box. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And I'm going to move on to the vote.
Could we request a name vote, please?
Certainly. Name of the vote.
So this is a vote in asking the question, those in favour of the motion before. Councillor Linda Arkley. Councillor Ken Barry. Councillor Lewis Bartoli. Councillor Liam Bones. Councillor Sean Brockbank. Councillor Brian Burdis. Councillor Carol Burdis. Councillor Karen Clark. Councillor Debbie Cox. Councillor Stephen Cox. Councillor Naomi Craven. Councillor Sarah Day. Councillor Davy Drummond. Councillor Sandra Graham. Councillor Janet Hunter. Councillor Carl Johnson. Councillor Hannah Johnson. Councillor Christopher Johnson. Councillor Frank Lott. Councillor Pamela McIntyre. Councillor Anthony McMullen. Councillor Jim Montague. Councillor Andy Newman. Councillor John O'Shea. Councillor Norman Percy. Councillor Stephen Phillips. Councillor Bruce Pickard. Councillor Martin Rankin. Elected Mayor Redfern. Councillor Willie Samuel. Councillor Jane Shaw. Councillor John Sterling. Councillor Matthew Thurloway. Councillor Joan Walker. Councillor Judith Wallace. Councillor George Westwater. Councillor Matt Wilson. So that gives us 28 in favour of the motion, Chair, and 9 abstentions.
Thank you, Mr Roberts. Can I move on to item agenda number 6, timetable for meetings? And can I ask Mayor Redfern to move the report?
Thank you, Chair. This report presents a draft programme of Council and Committee meetings for the 2022-23 municipal year. It also requests the Council to determine which Council meetings during 2022-23 should be designated for the purposes of public question time. The recommendations are to agree the programme of meetings for 2022-23 as set out in Appendix A to this report, and agree that the meetings of the full Council proposed for 21st of July 2022, 24th of November 2022 and the 19th of January 2023 were those at which questions are already taken from members of the public. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Redfern. Councillor Johnson, would you like to second that?
Second that, Chair, yeah.
Are there any questions? Can I invite members to speak to the motion?
Just agreed.
Can we agree the report? Thank you. Item 7, Chair's announcements. I'd just like to thank everybody who was involved in the Victorian Christmas market. I know that Christmas seems a long time away now in January, but it was very, very well attended. I went down there twice myself. I'd just like to thank all the staff and stallholders and people who made it possible. And just remind everybody that next week's Holocaust Memorial Week, it'll be online, so it'll be on YouTube. Thank you. I'll pass you on to Mayor Redfern for the Mayor's announcements.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to thank everybody who has actually worked extremely hard to get us through these last couple of difficult years. And I want to make it very, very sure that everybody understands that we on this side of the House actually support our staff and are very proud of our staff. I find some of the things that have been said this evening quite upsetting, because my door is always open. The Chief Executive here is always ready to listen. Had you wanted a review, you just knock on the door and say, please could we have this view, we think it's really important. It wouldn't have been denied, it would have been agreed. I just want to say also as well, when you've been using fine words like morality, integrity, honesty, well, I'm going to ask you, Councillor Bartoli and Councillor Bones, that when you put your leaflets out, you don't refer to my red Fiesta as a limousine, right? The Mayor's limousine with a chauffeur driven. That is not the you have been told year after year, and yet somebody sent me a leaflet a week ago that's what's going through the doors. Is that your honesty? Is that your integrity? Shame, shame. So to everyone else, I'm sorry about that, but I think to have to talk about
point
honesty.
Point of order, Chair.
If I have to talk about honesty...
Point of order.
No.
Point of order, Chair. I've never referred to the Mayor's red Fiesta as a limousine or chauffeur-driven.
No, you said I had a limousine, not a red Fiesta.
Point of order, Sir Chair. I've never said that.
Well, everybody here has seen the leaflet, Councillor Bartoli, so somebody's telling the porkies. Anyway, but that's beside the point. You know now that I've got a red Fiesta and I drive myself around the borough. Thank you very much. Occasionally I'm in a civic car when I go to a civic function, but that's very, very rare. There are residents out there who are actually being told lies about my situation, and I object to it. And it's come on the Tory leaflet, and it's happened not once, not twice.
Chair, point of order, Chair. I think I've made it clear that we did not say that, and we're now being called liars. I think that's. I think if the elected mayor has wants to raise a standards complaint that we have lied and accused her of driving a limousine, and she's welcome to do so. But I think to just accuse us here,
I think what the mayor was referring to was his leaflets going out saying about a chauffeur-driven car.
The mayor's limousine, that's what's going out. Anyway, I will just leave it there. I'll actually sort of send you a copy of one of the leaflets I've been sent. Because you talk about honesty and integrity, and I trust that when you use those words, you act accordingly. So all I'm going to say to everyone else, I'm sorry about that, but at the end of the day, we have to be honest about what's been said in this chamber. Yeah. I don't want to be personal. It's not my nature to be personal. I just want some honesty. So at the end of the day, to everybody, sorry about that tonight. But we're coming up to election times, and let's have the truth. And if you want to know anything about this council, we will be open and honest. Come and knock on the door. Come and talk to the chief executive. Talk to me. We're not going to refuse anything, because I will not actually be head of a council that is accused of being corrupt or doing awful things. We're open and we're honest. Just come and ask us.
Point of order, Chair. We've never accused the head of the council of being corrupt either.
Right, can we just keep it down, please?
Chair, I'm going to apologise for that. I wasn't inferring they were saying that.
Okay.
But I was saying I wouldn't actually preside over a council where there was any wrongdoings, and I'm not suggesting that happened. I just want the public to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Item number 9, there's no questions from members of the council, so I'll now conclude the meeting. Thank you very much, and a safe journey home.